Hey there, everybody. Welcome into another DFS Army video. I'm your boy Chapadong, and today we're going to cover the features of the Domination Station MLB Optimizer. Normally a VIP type of video, but we're going to let this one slip out to the public because I want to show you how I can make you a better daily fantasy sports player. FanDuel, DraftKings, doesn't matter. I get questions all the time in our Discords. I answer them a lot of times through screen share videos. And if you like this type of coaching style or this type of content, you need to like and subscribe to the video and let me know. Comment below. If you're already a DFS Army member, first of all, thank you for keeping me employed. Second of all, let me know inside the Discord channels that these are the types of videos that you like, where you can ask a question and get a video response showing you exactly what it is that we do. And, stick around, because at the end of the video, I'm going to build you a lineup capable of winning you a large field tournament. And I'm going to use the Domination Station Optimizer to do it. So let's dive in. Let's get up and get moving. Tuesday morning, grab your cup of coffee, notepad, sit down. Let's do our thing. We'll talk DraftKings. Let's talk on draft. I do a lot of FanDuel stuff, but let's talk about DraftKings this morning because that seems to be what most people play. And if this thing would ever load up for me, that's not the greatest first impression, is it? But really and truly, my computer's been running a little bit slow lately, so I don't really understand why. When I look at the implied run totals here, they're going to help me point out a few things. But mostly, the ownership projections have changed the face of daily fantasy sports. I'm going to use common things that I know through my own research and my own back testing. If you haven't noticed, we do have a back testing tool here where we can compare to previous slates. We've also got multiple slates already loaded today. We can check on entire games, check off entire games, check on a team, check off a team, whatever it is that you really want to do. The controllability of these features are at your fingertips and help you control and build the types of lineups to tell the story that you want to tell, because it's a lot of what a DFS slate is. It's just a story that you're trying to tell. You can build from salary ranges of individual players from, whatever salary range you want. I typically don't use that button a lot. The fantasy point range, you want a minimum of 4 points. You can use the sliders there. You can punch in the number itself, whatever it is that you want to do. The one number that I do use a lot is I do use the salary cap. Now on FanDuel, I'm usually within $1,000 of the cap. So today, just for kicks and grins on bigger slates, let's keep it within, say, $2,000 of the cap. I want a lineup with a minimum of a $48,000 spend. I know it's baseball. I know you can leave money on the table, but studies have shown that most GPP winners don't leave a lot on the table. I can click between optimal mode and tournament mode. I get asked that question a lot myself. What is the difference? Well, tournament mode tends to shuffle players better. It controls your exposure to your players. If you're going to be in, say, 30% of the lineups, say Ronald Acuna is going to be in 30% of the lineups today based on projections and where he falls, tournament mode is going to spread that out throughout 100 lineups a little bit better than optimal. Optimal might cram him in the first 30% of the lineups it builds and then not use him the rest of the way. Whereas as the lineups get built, tournament mode is going to say we want to keep him at about 30%. We've used him a lot lately. Let's take a little break. Oh, we're a little low on him. Let's put him back in. Let's take a little break. It's going to evenly distribute. It's going to give you a little bit better mix of your player pool. Fantasy points is a lot of what we use. Rating is an all-inclusive number that kind of takes a lot of things into consideration. All proprietary, to be honest with you. I'm an OG here at DFS Army. I don't even know what the hell goes into the rating. What I do know is that I use fantasy points. I know people that have used rating. I don't tend to use it that much myself. Unique players. How much lineup overlap do you like? Now if you're trying to get a lot of lineups that are similar to each other and push them all through the cut line or get them all up towards first place all at once, you want all 100 of your lineups to look very, very similarly, then you're going to use very, very few unique players. A unique player is just somebody, like in this case, if I use one unique player, every lineup's going to be different by one guy. That may be different by more, but it's going to be different by at least one guy. If I come all the way down here to 6 unique players, it's going to make every lineup different by 6 players. It's going to take out 6 and put 6 new ones in. It's only going to overlap 2 or 3 or 4 players throughout that lineup and across all 100 of your lineups. That's going to give you more spread. That's going to give you more diversification in your lineups. If you play MLB or Daytona NASCAR or PGA or some hockey, some of the more volatile sports, sometimes those uniques definitely benefit you because the player projections are so random, they're so wide ranging that you never really know who's going to have a bad day or who's going to have a good day. And you want to capture some of those players a little further down the list that the optimizers might not be looking at. And those are the guys that can put you over the edge. But if you're like me, or if you're playing NBA, something with a little bit more accuracy to the projections, then maybe you want to tighten those lineups up more and not have a lot of differentiation between them. And that's what the uniques do for you. If you're a back tester, test one unique versus 3 and see how the lineups score. Test 3 versus 5. See where the drop off is. Go back, and I don't mean go back through one slate and say, well, it didn't work. I mean go back through dozens of slates and see if you can't pick up on a trend or a pattern. I have done this. Scott Newman has done this. Razzle has done this. A lot of our other sports coaches have done a lot of work in back testing, and we know what numbers affect these optimizers, and we put them to our advantage. We put them to good use for ourselves to exploit what it is that the recreational player may not know. That's one of the advantages to being inside and being a VIP at DFS Army, is we talk about this stuff and we share this information with you readily, openly, transparently, and tell you exactly what it is that we're doing when we play with these machines. For today, I'm just going to use 2 uniques. Browser and server mode is really just whether you use your browser's cache, I guess, or the separate server. One of them tends to run a little faster than the other. I never know which is which. I just usually keep it here. How many lineups do you want to run? You might want to run 20. You might want to run a full 150. Our optimizer gives you the capability to run up to 300 at once. You want 150 nickels and then 150 quarters to put what it is, 40, 45 bucks into play on FanDuel? Go for it. You want to run, say, 10, 20 max dime times over on DraftKings? Well, by all means, run out 200 lineups and crank off 200 lineups and then randomly mix them through your CSV file if you know how to do that. If you don't know how to do that, of course, you need some VIP coaching, because we teach people how to do that every single day. Ownership cap. On larger slates, we've noticed that there is a breakpoint number that tends to work. Now, I don't know what the number is on DraftKings. I do know on FanDuel that it is under about 200, lower down to about 150 or so. Lower owned lineups, lower ownership does win. And it runs rampant in baseball. Chalk is great, and chalk does work as well, but you're going to want some lower owned plays that do go off. Mark Canha last night, he won some people some money, didn't he? Now, I might use that number and say call it 200 and force everything to go under 200% ownership. On a bigger slate, I might even go a little bit lower to like a 160, okay? These allowing hitters versus opposing pitchers is something for smaller slates. The batting order. You can uncheck these guys if you don't want to run any 8-hole or 9-hole hitters. Be my guest. I've done a lot of that. If you want to force players at lower ownership, you could force, say, upwards of 3 players under 10% owned into your lineup. That works as well. You can use randomization. Randomization works an awful lot like uniques, in that the randomization is going to take the actual player's projection and it's going to randomize it. Let's say you want to put on your hitters, you want to put a 20% number for randomization. Now again, if you're a back tester, test it with 5%, test it with 30%, test it with 50%, test it with the number that you want. Because you need to run back through dozens of slates and see, do I do better? Do I build better lineups, more winners when I'm using a little bit of randomness or a lot of randomness? Personally, I think you're going to find an interesting thing when you actually go do the work yourself. I'm not going to give you all the secrets here. I'm just going to give you a few. I think that you're going to find some interesting trends when you do that work yourself. In terms of the randomization, though, what does a 20% setting do? Well, a 20% setting shuffles up that projection by 20%, up or down. Let's say it takes a projected player up here at like 20% of Kevin Gausman. And all right, I know, I used hitters. Let me find a hitter just to make things the same. Okay, so we've got a highest projection of about 12 points for Jorge Soler, right? So all I'm going to do on the calculator here is multiply by 20%, 2.4 points. What's 12 minus 2.4 points? 9.6. What is 12 plus 2.4 points? 14.4. All that means is in each lineup that this lineup optimizer builds, it's going to randomize his projection and give you a number somewhere between 9.6 and 14.4. Okay? If you tighten it down to 10% instead of 2.4 points, you're using 1.2 points. It's a tighter range of possibilities. If you're widening way out to 40 or 50%, it can go as high as, well, 12-point projection at 50% would be a number between 6 and 18. When it comes to baseball, we know those ranges of outcomes are very, very wide, and so you benefit from some randomness. Now, do I use any? I haven't been. And there's a window to the soul. That I just have found in back testing, it doesn't do a lot. It doesn't add a ton of benefit. Again, I've also shifted my philosophy towards spreading way out and diversifying and covering every possibility that I can to really tightening down and just living with it, man. I'll go all in on a pitcher, all in on a hitting stack, and I'll just live with it in MME. And I have found that my results are better. Yours might not be. Your mileage may vary, but mine definitely have. If you want to talk old school, new school philosophies, once again, come into the Discord, be a VIP member, and I will tell you everything from who my third grade teacher was in terms of what I know about daily fantasy sports. In terms of stacking, we've got all of these features. I don't use the controlled stacking stuff anymore. I just use this one. I can randomly select the teams, which means I'm going to get some Atlanta, Colorado, Atlanta, Miami, Miami, Seattle, LA, Chicago type stacks, and I don't know what's going to be what. It's randomly mixing the teams. I do this personally when I'm looking to build small batches of lineups, 3 max, stuff like that, where I'm really set on 4 or 5 or 6 team offenses, and I don't really care which 2 I get. I'm not targeting Atlanta and the Chicago Cubs specifically. I'm like, well, I'm using Atlanta, San Diego, Chicago, Houston, Dodgers, and those 5 teams, I don't really care which ones I get paired with which. I will use the randomly select teams button for that. But for most other things, I don't use it. Now, when it comes to baseball, we know that big stacks work. Your 5x-X's, your 5x2, 5x3s work. They generate more leverage in large field tournaments. They win large field tournaments more often than the 4x-X or the 3x-X type of stacks do. So, honestly, I'm almost just a 100% 5x2 kind of guy. If I want to, I might build 75% of those and 25% 5x3s. That's about all I do when it comes to building just a few lineups. Now, when it comes to building a lot of lineups, 100, 150 lineups, I like to let the optimizer do its work. I will cut down to just a few teams here offensively, and then I'll run 3x2s. And then I'll let the optimizer create a 3-stack, 4-stack, 5-stack, or whatever if it wants. I'm putting the 3x2 onto the teams that I like. Again, say Atlanta and Chicago or something like that. But if the optimizer just loves San Diego out in Coors Field, it's going to fill in all of those little one-off plays from San Diego, and I'm going to end up actually getting a 4 or a 5 stack of San Diego Padres, and it's going to make my lineup look like it's a 5-stack lineup, which actually wins the contest, but it's using my little mini stacks, my little 2 or my little 3 stacked players to cover those bases. It's a weird philosophy. It comes from a ton of back testing. It's a trend I picked up on. It's been working again this year. I don't know how it would work maybe on DraftKings. I'm just telling you on a FanDuel side, I like to use as small stacks as possible. Let the machine work. Most of the time we get in the way of these machines. These machines are far more sophisticated than any research we'll ever do. We can give it some general ideas, but we almost need to then take our hands off the machine and let it work. All of these features are great. You can use some, you can use none, you can use all of them, but the more restrictions, the more features you use, the more restrictions you put on this machine, the more you're getting away from what the machine wants to do, and you'd better be right. Because if you're wrong, you're going to be really, really wrong. And these machines with the projections and being guided by the ownership projections really helps steer you in the right direction to where you just don't have to do a ton of research anymore, in my opinion. Okay? So, if I was building all 5x2 and 5x3 stacks, what teams would I use? You can check or uncheck all these guys. Let's say that I only wanted Atlanta, San Diego, LA, Baltimore, and I don't know, Arizona. And let's say I wanted, let's go ahead and include, say, Chicago for a 6th team. And I wanted to have at least 5% of all of those stacks, but no more than, say, 60% of any of those stacks. Then there I go. I can use these global boxes to put all of those numbers in. Now, if I want to fine tune it and say, okay, I actually want 10% minimum of Atlanta and only a 2% minimum of Chicago, I want to allow Atlanta all the way up to 60%. I only want 10% of Chicago because I'm not much of a believer today. That's fine. I can fine tune as I go. If I want to control my stack formations and not use any 8 or 9 hole hitters here in my stacks, that's fine. But I've already controlled it up here personally. Once I get my stacks set the way that I want them, let's say I want no more than 80% of any of these teams in one stack, I can just go right over here to stack the mirror stack button and do the same thing, and boom. I now have 2 identical stack sizes. If I want to further control this side over here, the smaller stack size, that's fine. If I want to only control the bigger stack size, that's fine. If I want to copy them both and mirror them, I just click that button right there, and it works as well, okay? Now, when you come down here, what teams do we actually want to play today? I'll go ahead and check these guys all back into play, and I'll go ahead and reset this back up here so that it's the same. And I'm going to figure out what teams do I want to play. I can do a couple things. I can start using our tools like Research Station, the starting lineups page, leverage stacks page, the chalkboard, etc. I can start using those tools if I want to. Or I can come in here and I can literally just go by the chalk. Who are the chalky pitchers? Who are the pitchers that are projected over, say, 12 or 13 points? Those are the guys that I want in my lineups, right? Those are the guys that are in the GPP winner most often. I don't want both high-priced guys or whatever, and that's in a lot of cases what I'm going to get, even a Max Fried. These other guys, they didn't make the list, right? They're not projected high enough. They didn't make the list. If you wanted to go all the way down to, say, 12 points, fine, do that. I'm going to get 2 pitchers on DraftKings that are all over 12-point projected. Any of these other guys aren't good enough. You're not cutting out a lot of people, mind you, but you are cutting out some. The other thing I might come down here and do is I might start taking out the underdogs. I've favored teams, honestly, tend to win. That's not foolproof, but the odds of Trevor Rogers as a big underdog beating the Atlanta Braves are pretty small. Could he throw in a lot of strikeouts? Sure. But you benefit from those win points and on FanDuel quality start points and things. So it definitely helps to make sure that you're playing just the favorites. What kind of a salary matters? You might not want somebody priced too high. You might not want somebody priced too low. You might not want somebody too chalky. Totally up to you. Gausman hadn't been off to a great start today. You want to fade the chalk? Go for it. Pablo Lopez, however, going up against the White Sox, looks like he's in a pretty good spot. You might eat that chalk. That's up to you. You can also sort by all of these columns and bring all those high-owned pitchers up to the top and then decide what you want to do from there. If you end up with, say, some Pablo Lopez and then get some Logan Gilbert with him, you might be in a really, really good spot today. I don't know what the optimizer is going to do. This is about all I do. I don't go boosting players if I want to. Watch what happens to his projections here. This 18.17 projection. If I boost it 15%, it changes. If I decrease it, it changes. Now, with no randomization, that's the number it's going to use. With randomization, say I was running 10% randomization, it lowers everything. That also lowers his fantasy point per dollar, which is what these machines love the most. See how that number changed to 1.95 and it goes up to 2.25? It's all of a sudden going to really like him over, say, Trevor Rogers, who I have unchecked. Our projections like Trevor Rogers, but it would like Pablo Lopez quite a bit if I boost his projection. It's going to pull him into more lineups that way until maybe 100%. Until I put some kind of an exposure max on him or a cap. If I want to cap everybody at 70%, I can do that. If I want to not cap anybody, that's fine. If I want to cap individual players at 60%, that's fine. If I want to force him in at a minimum of 10%, that's fine. All of these are on the table. But again, the more restrictions you put on the machine, the more you're going to bog it down, the harder it's going to be to build lineups. I personally am not a big fan of doing it that way. To get around the DraftKings rule, you can put a 99% on everybody, and now the machine will run. Sometimes it gives you that error that you don't get to, you have to change a couple of projections or something like that. You can either change the projections, you can slide all the way down here to guys that you're not really using and take that little 15.91 off. That technically counts as a change. And how much did it really change the projections? Like, not at all, right? And in that case, you can use the 100%, the full 100%, and get 100% of somebody if you want. Okay? So again, these are just all things that we talk about every single day inside Daily Fantasy, DFS Army and Daily Fantasy Sports. If you like this type of coaching and you like this type of information, you definitely need to consider becoming a member. I'll even throw the link in the bottom of the description with a coupon code in there. So I might throw you a 10 or 20% off coupon today. You just never know. So thanks for sticking with us. Let's continue talking about some of these features, because that is in a nutshell an awful lot of what we're doing. But how would I use this machine to then go back and pick from the teams that I like? There's a large correlation between high implied run totals, like 5.2 for the Atlanta Braves, 5.4 for the Houston Astros, and ownership. That's low-hanging fruit. Everybody sees, well, Vegas is very, very good at establishing. The sports books are very, very good at establishing these numbers, and they really want to kind of dive in and put all these resources into getting the number right. It's baseball. You're oftentimes going to do pretty well by just fading the chalk and getting away from the chalk. And there's a high correlation in those high implied run teams. Now, do they always produce like that? No. Do they sometimes? Sure. That's up to you to determine how much of that you want to take advantage of. Also, Coors Field's on the slate. Going to be a lot of ownership probably on San Diego. That might push more leverage towards Houston. High implied run total. Atlanta, high implied run total, but not in Coors Field. Or another game like Arizona and St. Louis may go off. You just never know. But I like to use these numbers to get an idea. And then I come down here and I sort the hitter pool by projected ownership as well. And on big slates, look, 15%, 14%, that's not chalk. I don't care what anybody tells you. That's not chalk, man. That's not going to matter. So these numbers today are completely insignificant. However, we can still determine who carries the most ownership on this slate. And it looks like right now Houston has, 4, 5, 6 spots. Seattle has a few spots, and San Diego has a few spots. Those three teams are probably going to be pretty highly owned. Without being an ownership is generated by people doing research. They look at implied run total, they look at matchups, they look at projections, they look at all sorts of things. And then people kind of start to form a consensus that says this is correct. And then they follow that consensus and they jump on it and they play that consensus. The consensus right now is pointing towards, even though everybody's got just a world of options to choose from today, it still looks like people are favoring Houston, Seattle, San Diego. So those teams have baked in research for you, done on them in terms of their matchups. People are liking it. A lot of times the consensus, the industry, is kind of right. Now, today, will it bear out? I don't know. But over time, over a month, 2 months, 3 months, that tends to bear out. You can use these ownership projections as your guide. Let's say I use those three teams. I've got Seattle, I've got San Diego, and I've got Houston. Now, who's next? Looks like, Minnesota's in there a little bit. St. Louis, Toronto's in there a little bit. Our projections love Toronto for a week. The Atlanta Braves are not really in there other than Acuna as a one-off. It shouldn't surprise you if Atlanta goes off today. They score a ton of runs. They're playing Miami. Miami doesn't give up a lot of runs. I don't know who Miami's pitcher is. Maybe that's what shies people away, but the Atlanta Braves can torch anybody. But just sticking to this methodology, let's say the next one in line looks like Minnesota and Toronto, and maybe some St. Louis. So Minnesota, Toronto, and St. Louis. There's Toronto facing Kansas City, St. Louis, and where did Minnesota facing the White Sox? I mean, those are all reasonable choices, right? Let's say that these are the teams that we want to focus on. Notice that as I uncheck the game, they leave this area right here. If I uncheck everybody here, and then I come back up here and I check them all in, this is just a cheat code. It's just a fast way to get all of the teams put back in. See how they're all checked now? I don't need to search and find them. Where's Seattle? Where's Seattle? I don't need to do any of that. I can also turn around, and if I put like an 80% stack maximum on these guys and then just mirror it, I'm going to have 80% of somebody that it likes the most. Then I'm going to be forced to at least get a little bit of a second team in there. That's how I like to run. You could go all in. If you go all in, keep it at 100%. You might end up with all the same stack. That's fine. If it works, you're going to be sitting pretty. Now, with all of these guys checked back in, there you go. Now, some of the other features that I can point out to you, boosting the projections works. You don't see enough Fernando Tatis Jr. in your lineup, boost him. It'll let you do that, and then you'll see him pull in more often. Another feature that people don't talk about a lot is, let's say, Cal Raleigh. I don't like Cal Raleigh as a one-off play. I don't want to see him in a lineup by himself. I only want to see him in Seattle stacks. I click this little link right here. Once I click that link, he's only going to show up in team stacks. That's it. He'll never show up anywhere else. Use that button on as many players as you want, or not any at all. Again, remembering that if you start to restrict the machine and put shackles on it, it's going to start to bog down. I like keeping the machine wide open, but this definitely works. When you start seeing some little peon one-off from the Chicago White Sox that you don't want to see, just click that little link on the guy, and all of a sudden he'll only appear in stacks, and guess what? You're not stacking the Chicago White Sox, so he won't show up. It's a neat little way to control your lineups and get proper builds. I'm using stack formations of 5x2 and 5x3. I've narrowed down my pitchers. I've narrowed down my team offenses. I'm looking at some of these little things you want to manually adjust. I showed you how to manually adjust the projections. All these little things. I'm trying to cover bases and see if I'm not forgetting any of these features and showing you how to use them. You can use all the position tabs and everything. But we're building, 20 lineups? We can click Optimize. We can see what the machine does. I can go through each of these tabs and see, okay, it likes Grayson Rodriguez, it likes Pablo Lopez. We predicted that. Steven Matz at a little bit lower number. I don't know what happened there, why that number adjusted lower. I didn't touch it. That I remember. I didn't touch it unless I came up here. Oh, I took the I took the 0.1 off, 0.01 off of him. There we go. But that's an indication that I manually adjusted that projection somewhere. But it likes Steven Matz okay, Logan Webb okay. These are my catchers, my first baseman, my second baseman, etc. But these are the teams that it likes. It likes tons of Toronto today, facing Kansas City, St. Louis, Seattle, or San Diego, Houston, Seattle. Not much. You're not getting a lot of these guys down in here. So it's not using a lot of those chalkier teams. But again, at 15% ownership, how chalky are they really? They're not dominant chalk. So you're focusing in a slightly different direction, and you're going with what the numbers on the optimizer are telling you. You know you've included the teams that are relatively highly owned on the slate, but you're focused on the ones that are not the highest owned. They're kind of just under the radar. This is actually a very good way to build. When I look at stack sizes, I'm looking at Toronto and St. Louis on the bigger 5-man stacks, almost across the board, and then sprinkling in some 2 and 3 stacks of San Diego, St. Louis, Toronto, Houston, etc. I can also look through my lineups here. I can see the projection. I can see what the fantasy point projection is, how much the cap it used, how much total ownership the lineup is using, is pulling in from, and I can see who my pitchers are, and then I can see my stacks. My 5 stack is Toronto, and my 2 stack is San Diego. I can check the batting order here for gaps in my stacks. I've got a San Diego stack of a 2 and a 5. That's kind of close together. I've got a 1, 2, 3, 5, 6 stack. That's very close together for Toronto. If I like that lineup, I leave it. If I don't like it, I uncheck it. And it won't download into my CSV file when I decide to download and enter it into contests. And I can go through every single lineup I want like this. This is how we do it. And we can see if we scroll down here towards the bottom, there's a St. Louis stack starting to pop in there with a 3-man Seattle stack, a couple of different pitchers. There's a Toronto and San Diego again. There's a St. Louis and Toronto, a Minnesota in there with Toronto, whatever. It's using these teams and mixing and matching them, not randomly. It's using the projections to do it. But with a baseball outcome or a mindset on a baseball outcome, we're starting to see where the teams that we want to focus on will mix and match a little bit with those secondary teams. That's what's going, and as long as you're doing it this way, you're going to build effective lineups. Now, how would I go about doing it? Here's the big reveal. Thanks for sticking around. If you liked and subscribed to the channel, I appreciate it. If you've already left me a comment telling me that I'm a big idiot and a big dork, that's fine too. I don't care. I'll probably respond to it anyway. But if you've stuck around, let's build a lineup for real, okay? Now, the way we're going to do this, we're going to leave those pitchers checked in. I do a lot of my philosophy, whether I'm building a few lineups or a lot of lineups. I kind of use the same philosophy. But I may cut this down to just a couple of teams. When I cut these guys off, I like Atlanta. I think that they're maybe not the odds, and I can fade Coors Field, right? So there we go. We've already got a couple. We know we like Toronto. We know it's going to use a ton of Toronto. But we saw Houston in there, and we saw Seattle in there. Right? We're targeting some of these teams. Baltimore's been great lately. Minnesota facing Chicago, probably in a decent spot. St. Louis, probably in a decent spot. But let's just use these three teams. Let's mirror that stack. Let's get a little bit of differentiation. And let's go picking through these two. That's the only change that I made. Except I might go 100% 5x2. I can uncheck this and not get any of these as well. Click Optimize and let it go. I'm going to build all 5x2 stacks. We'll see. Who are my stacks? Houston and Seattle with Houston and Seattle. It's the only teams it liked. If I wanted more diversification, I put a little bit different cap on these guys, and that's what I'm going to end up with. But if I see Houston and Seattle suggested, I'm going to go through here and I'm going to start picking. What's my Houston stack look like? It's the blue one. It's the big stack on this side. So what? 4, 5, what? 2, 4, 5, 6, 7. 2, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's only missing the 3. That's a good single gap stack. And as long as a 1, 2 out of Seattle, that's a no gap mini stack. That's great. As long as I like my pitchers, I'm good to go here. If I don't like my one-off, I can swap him out by clicking the little arrow button. If I'd rather have McNeil or Kevin Biggio in the 5, that's fine. I can pop him in there, and it'll change things up for me. So I can fine-tune this by hand if I want to. If I don't want an outfielder like Chas McCormick, I can do the same thing. I can change this up, and I can go looking in the green for all other salaries that fit. If I wanted to include, I don't see another Houston player, but if I wanted to keep my stack intact, I would include another Houston player. Didn't see that opportunity, but it does present itself on occasion. What I would do if I'm building a single lineup is I would come down here and I would pick the lineup that I like the best. What if I wanted Jorge Soler as a one-off is very intriguing. This flip-flop that it's a 5-man Seattle stack, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then a 4, 7 Houston stack. I may not like Jose Abreu. I may look for a one-off to substitute in for him. Don't see another Houston guy, but I may use Alec Burleson. I may use somebody along those lines to swap in for him. And that's going to help me fine-tune that lineup. But Jorge Soler is a one-off. If I don't like the one-off, I can come in here and I can start looking for who else might I use. If I like Conforto better, if I like Ian Happ or Michael, I can use any of these, Anthony Santander. I can use any of these guys. Maybe I have my own idea, and the optimizer got me close, but it didn't get me all the way there. I can finish it off by hand. Pardon the pun. Horrible pun for those of you that just heard that. But if I like this lineup better or this line, that's a lot of what I do. And then I can use these ideas to see if I don't want to see Houston and Seattle, I can go back through and throw in Atlanta and Baltimore and say, okay, but I'll include some San Diego and I'll include some Houston, and some Minnesota or something like that. And now what do you have for me? I'm using the optimizer to get ideas. Who is it pairing with whom? And how is it going to start figuring that out? Well, there's a big Baltimore stack with a little San Diego stack. Really liked Baltimore, didn't it? Okay, well, maybe that's a hint for me. Maybe I should be including some Baltimore today. Now, who would I include them with? I don't know the answer to that question. So to find that out, I cut them down to, say, 30% since I know it really, really likes Baltimore. Or I just uncheck them and say, give me the Atlanta stacks. And let's have it run Atlanta stacks. And I should have probably, if I'm only using one team, I should have brought this back up to 100%. Because otherwise it was going to give me unstacked lineups. You need those numbers to add up to 100%. But there's all my Atlanta stacks. 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, and it's pairing it with Minnesota here, San Diego here, Houston here. Pick. Which one do you like the best? This is how you're going to piece these lineups together. But if you like Baltimore and Atlanta for whatever reason, you come back up here and maybe you say Baltimore on the small side Oh, but you'll leave a little bit of wiggle room for Houston. But let's cap Houston and say 50% so that it forces some Baltimore. I'm going to get Atlanta with Baltimore and Atlanta with Houston. And let's allow some 5x3 stacks as well. Let's see what it prefers. Does it prefer 5x2 or 5x3? Well, I guess it's forcing me to go 50-50 on this, which I don't like. I would rather it choose what it wants to do. Only 3 teams can make it work. So we come down here, we come up here. It wants the ability to, I guess, build by 13 teams. At least we're getting more. It's salary constrained to a large degree, but we're still going to see who these teams are. They're paired with Houston, paired with Houston, paired with Houston. There's one that's paired, well, with Houston again, Houston. There's one paired with Baltimore. So if I want to see, salary is going to be a problem if I want to use all of Atlanta and pair it with Baltimore. If I wanted to fix this up a little bit differently, I can end up going with very little Atlanta and a whole lot of Baltimore. And pair this with the same teams on this side and see what it decides to do there. It may have trouble building lineups again with salary, but it might not because Baltimore is cheaper. Well, 13 teams. But let's see if we can find, there's a Baltimore with Houston. See if we can find, there's a Baltimore with Atlanta. So it's largely doing if I only need to build 1, 2, or 3 lineups, this will get me there. This will give me ideas. This will let me see what combinations of player it mixes and matches. Okay, but if I'm building 100 or 150 MME lineups, I'm going to use the more generic that I used earlier in the video, and I'm just going to let it go. I'm just going to let the machine do most of the work for me. I'm not going to fine tune too terribly much. But when I am building just a few lineups like these, I'm going to definitely pare down, make some hard choices, make some stands, and go with my gut and build lineups in that vision, and then look at them and kind of hand tweak them towards the end, fine tune them towards the end. Hopefully that makes sense to you. So really and truly, when it comes down to this type of information, again, if you like this type of teaching style and this type of video, I know it's long, but if you like listening to this, I do a lot of 15-minute videos, quick 5-10 minute answers to questions inside our Discord chat rooms. Love to have you be a part of it. I'll put the coupon code down there in the description of this video. I'd love to see you inside DFS Army as a VIP, MLB only, whatever it is that you'd rather be. We're also building out a poker community if you want to be part of that. I'm heading that charge up as well. But please, give me a little thank you. Throw a little ducat in my tip jar. Like, subscribe the video. Also, turn on the notification bell so you get videos that do drop. You can look back through the poker podcasts if you're interested in poker as well. Love to have you on the inside at dfsarmy.com. This is Chapadong once again, and my goal is to make you a better daily fantasy player. Take care. We'll see y'all later.